Hey y'all. Okay, let's do another Raw Reflections where I, Keaton Wyndham, as a conservative Southern Christian, am reflecting on the program I'm going through, which is a northern, more like woke, liberal state college and degree plan while I am trying to get a master's in sexual health with an emphasis in sex therapy. So let's get into it. In my last video, I explained that I have started a new class and it is a huge mouthful. So we're just going to call it Law and Policy. Let me see if I have it written in my notes. What was it called? Impacts of Law, Policy, and Government Regulation on Human Sexuality. So, like I said, I just call it Law and Policy because ain't nobody got time to memorize that huge name. Week 2 was about sex ed, pregnancy and parenting, and gender affirming care. One thing about this class is that it has a ton of cases and links to review and to consume, and to be very clear, whenever possible, I steer clear of anything to do with like gender affirming care and like sexual or gender identity and stuff like that, because that's not something I agree with, and it's not something that I want to expose myself to, just because there is no benefit in that other than the cursory like understanding what the other side thinks, feels, and believes. I am not going to seek out that kind of content. So we are going to start with, first of all, I had to sign up for a meeting with my instructor as part of the final project. All of the weekly assignments are building up to this final project, like in school, like teachers break up a huge assignment into like little pieces along the way, and that's what this professor has done. So each one of these steps kind of push us closer to the finish line, and one of those required pieces that have a participation like point value are for us to schedule a meeting, like a 30-minute meeting with our professor, to kind of review and discuss what our project is and kind of where our mind's at and like what our goal is, so that she can help us like put it in like the best law and policy format. And I put it off last week. We had the option to like go ahead and schedule it last week, this week, or the next week. Not to have the meeting, just to schedule it. Mine is set for next week. And I am not looking forward to it, not because I don't like my professor, like not because I don't think she's good at what she does, because it's very clear that she is smart. But like in her lecture videos, she's trying to like show off her personality a little bit, and I appreciate the effort, but her t-shirts always say something like very like woke and radical, and like my shirt says data or it didn't happen. Like the clothes you wear are a conscious decision and like tell the world a message. And I believe that if you don't have it written down, if you don't have data to support your claim, then like it's just an opinion. And her shirt this week said protect trans kids. And I like that is such a hot take to just like walk around with on a t-shirt, and it rubs me the wrong way, and so it just makes me feel like I need to make the safest choices possible to like protect my grades and protect my peace. And, you know, and people often make the mistake of thinking that the phrase protect your peace means that you're avoiding hard situations and that you're like protecting yourself and ultimately making yourself more fragile. But when I say protect my peace, I'm really just saying, like, I'm going to put a boundary in place. That doesn't mean that I'm not going to wade into the water, but I'm going to take precautions. Like, I I'm gonna get in the shark infested water, but I'm gonna be in the cage. Like, I'm not just gonna be swimming around with a cut on my leg, you know? Not trying to put myself in harm's way for no reason. Um, but so I got that scheduled, and I can see how it's a necessary piece in this process because I still am kind of struggling as far as the project goes. Um, my project proposal was due this week. That was the assignment. You know, last week I submitted 3 potential project ideas, and I wouldn't have thought that I would have chosen this one, but in the interest of like self-preservation and like avoiding hot topics that like I anticipated she might bring her like bias into, I nixed the evangelical idea, even though, like I said last week, that would be probably the one I was most likely to do. Um, I didn't want the evangelical aspect to like open this door for her to like tank my grade. Um, and I looked into what sex ed is supposed to look like in Texas, and it kind of just seemed like they have made recent changes, like here in 2022 and even 2024. Um, but like, it's really just a matter of some of these places are not implementing them, even though the changes have been made. Whether or not that's a matter of them not knowing the changes have occurred, I have no idea. I can't speak to that. Um, and because of that, I felt like I would have a hard time taking that angle. So I actually went with a proposal for students in life skills and those with high support needs receiving sex education. And I whittled it down to the high school level, not the middle school level. Um, and so for my project proposal, I said that I would do like an action/advocacy letter and maybe some kind of PowerPoint presentation. Like, I still kind of felt like I was throwing out a lot of hypotheticals. Like, it's very clear when you read my project proposal that I still don't really know what I'm doing. And I will own that. um, my target audience for the proposal letter is kind of twofold. And really, when I say twofold, I mean 2 different groups, but a lot of different people. It would be specifically and intentionally sent to school board members, district administrators, maybe even some campus administrators. I feel like every school district you go into, the personnel it would need to go to is so different. And then my secondary audience for this letter, the people who I would want to see it, but who don't necessarily need to see it because they're not like voting members, would be the parents of these life skills students, because parents do need to be involved. I have a child with high support needs who is in a life skills class, and I always appreciate being in the know. Even when I can't be there, I like to be intentional when I can. And because high support need kids, often their parents are right alongside them, trying to help them navigate their world. And so sex ed is a tricky subject already, and I definitely feel like it's something parents would need to be present for and on board for, and helping to support the concepts that would eventually be taught so that they can reiterate and clarify for their kids as needed. Um, and then we had to make sure that we had clear objectives for the project. And so my objectives were that whoever read the proposal or action letter or saw the PowerPoint, by the end of whatever my project was, the goal was that I wanted the person consuming the material to be able to state the reasons that make modified sex education for special needs students important. Like, there's a reason that special ed kids need sex education, just like gen ed kids. And I want them to be able to tell how members of the community would benefit from the sex ed program that's modified. And when I say members of the community, I mean like how the parents and guardians would benefit, because, I want to take that responsibility off of their shoulders. As a special needs parent, I feel like more often than not, it is implied that I have to be everything and everybody for my child, and it's stressful, and it's a huge responsibility, and I can't. I am not capable. I am a person. And while I know a lot about mental health and behavioral therapy and schools and how that's structured, like, that's a huge part of his life until he's, maybe 21, 22. But, I can't help him with the big adult stuff. And as his mom, he probably won't listen to me as well as he would listen to a teacher or a therapist or, somebody else coming in. And the last objective is that I want whoever reads it to be able to state how the modified sex education program for high school life skills students complies with the Texas education standards. Because it does. Like, whatever the parameters are that are set within the state laws and policies and the educational standards, you have to work with what you've got. You have to work within those limitations, and I believe that a good comprehensive program can still be cultivated and put into action. And at the end of it, the professor had us share some links and some resources that had really helped us kind of finalize and make the choice that we made. And I shared 4 links, one of which I shared in the last video description, that community action toolkit. But there are sex education curriculum guidelines, developmental disability teaching tools, and all kinds of information that I was able to find in addition to that toolkit. So I can share those links in the description, but still at the end of this assignment, my question for my professor was, first of all, am I describing what my project is going to be accurately? Is it appropriate to call it an advocacy letter? Because I am advocating for those special education students and life skills. And then even more than that, I said, ultimately, my top concern is a letter enough? Am I fulfilling the requirements? Because as someone who has such a heavy writing background, like, I can spit out this advocacy letter in like 20 minutes. and then just kind of go back in with some details and cite some sources. And that just didn't feel like enough for a 7 or 8 week project that we're spending the entire class on. So I was really confused. I was like, how deep do I need to go with this? Am I doing enough? Do I need to make a PowerPoint? Do I need to make like a sample presentation that I would do for the kids? What's going on with this? Like, give me some direction. I would greatly appreciate it. Like, I tried to communicate very plainly that, like, your girl is doggy paddling. I'm not drowning, but I might soon be. So that is ultimately what that meeting that I signed up for with my instructor, that's what it's geared towards discussing, is the project proposal. So let's see, we have talked about the instructor meeting and the project proposal. Are we going to go discussion board or current event? Let's go discussion board. So for the week 2 discussion board, we were given the link to the CDC's Youth Risk Behavior Surveillance Survey. And it was this survey that was done from 2013 to 2023, looking at certain risky behaviors of middle school and high school students across the country. And so I had to select one, like, risk behavior, and like some examples of risk behaviors would be like kids who used alcohol, or kids who did drugs, or kids who reported, a couple of categories of like sexual behaviors, or who have experienced dating violence, those types of things. And so after I picked a risk behavior, I had to compare the results to either a previous year's data or to a different country or city, some kind of different location. And so then we had to talk about the differences and what the role of public policy and or social attitudes may have played in the differences. And so the risk behavior that I chose was the amount of teens that reported being sexually active. And sexually active is such like a general term. It means different things to different people. So I'm really glad they defined it, and they meant, when they asked, are you sexually active, that they've had sex with at least one person in the previous 3 months. And I mean, that's not, like, 3 months seems like a long time. If you had sex with one person one time within a 3-month period, like, I personally wouldn't call that sexually active. But I'm glad they provided the parameters at least. Because when I was in high school, I probably would have been freaked out by the idea of having sex with anyone, any amount of times. So I wish that I could, like, go back to my teenage self and be like, what do you consider sexually active? Because I'm pretty sure I would have laughed at my answer. Current me would laugh at past me. So from 2013 to 2023, the survey reported that there was a decline of sexually active teens from 35% to 22% in females and 33% to 20% in males. Which, it's always interesting to see, like, how is it that women are out here having more sex than men? Like, I don't know why, but I just expected that number to be similar. And they're not that far off. It's 2 percentage points consistently from one to the other, but still, it's weird. Where are these 2% more of women coming from? Um, but so the most significant drop for males and females was from 2019 to 2021. And so I immediately addressed the elephant in the room for the most likely cause, uh, being COVID. People, if it was data from all over the country, in the South it was kind of more lax, but up north where people were in like more urban areas, they were like sent home and locked in their homes longer than the southern states were, and had a lot more restrictions than the southern states did. Um, and so that was a really extreme time period where people weren't going to work, they weren't going to school. So obviously they weren't being sexually active, and even when we weren't having to stay at home and literally locked down, people were wearing masks, and like when you can't see this much of someone's face, like it creates this social barrier. And so like it's hard to read people's faces, it's hard to gauge whether or not like they're flirting or being friendly. It just is a small thing that you don't think will have such a big impact on like your ability to connect with people, but it really does. um, I remember I was teaching during COVID, and whenever I would be teaching my lecture, I would have a face shield that I would wear, and it was clear because I taught special education and I taught math. And that combination of subject matter is so hard for kids. And I wanted them to see my face, to be able to read my face as they were already trying to grasp this hard concept. Um, and so when I taught to the whole class, I would wear my face mask, and as they worked independently, or like I would go around from group to group, I would put on an actual mask so that I could go get up close to them. And that worked really well. I don't know how I decided that or how I came up with it, but I was just like, enough's enough. I can't teach. My kids can't learn. Um, but but like I said, that didn't feel like a huge thing, but it was impacting the social environment and the classroom culture that I had. So I can only imagine that it had like a romantic impact. I can't tell you the amount of times that I will tell people I am so glad that I met, started dating, fell in love with, married my husband pre dating apps. I don't ever want to have to do that in my whole life. That seems so hard. And I really feel for people who are single and having to utilize dating apps because no, thank you. Um, Anywho, that was a long tangent. My apologies. So, I of course had to address the fact that like COVID was keeping people apart physically from each other. Um, but one of the things that I don't think people expected was that even once the lockdowns and the distance bans and the masks and stuff were done away with, that it like we came out of COVID with a totally different social culture. And kids immediately, once they went into lockdown, started creating social alternatives and started, talking to each other online and through videos and social media and um, like game chatting, where they put on the headphones and play the video games together from their own houses. Um, and it really it was a benefit during COVID so that these kids didn't suffer from social isolation. But now that everything has attempted to go back to normal, there is no normal. This is the new normal. And I and others, at least in education, talk about the world pre COVID and post COVID and how detached socially kids are. Kids would rather text someone sitting across the room than put their phone down and have a face to face conversation. Like the idea of old school communicating scares these kids to death because they do not know how to do it. They are so unfamiliar with it. And so if they're having a hard time forming friendships and having social chit chat, then that's obviously having an impact on their romantic relationships as well. And so that was really interesting to see that even after the bans, the CDC data from this risk behavior survey showed that the sexually active percentages didn't go back up. They remained at that plateaued level of 22% for females and 20% for males, just because they adopted it as their new normal. Um, the also, this was an interesting fact. So they gave an overall percentage of teens who had ever had sex at being 32% of teens. So not just the ones that were sexually active, but if they had ever had sex before, was at 32%, whereas the sexually active percentage was 21%. Um, and so, like, my mind immediately started conjuring up anecdotes of kids who, wanted to see what all the fuss was about, or like they had built sex up to be this like big cool thing in their mind, and they had sex and like it was a total letdown. And, they were like, oh, it's not as good as I thought it was going to be, or it's not as like special, like everybody talks about it like it's this unicorn, this like fantasy land. And it was kind of awkward, it was uncomfortable, it was weird. And they're just like, oh, it wasn't as big a deal as I thought. Maybe I'm not going to waste my time on that. um, and then uh, I know that there were some people in school when I was in high school that, because I was not having sex in high school, um, some people really respected that, and some people were like, oh my gosh, I don't know how you do it. And so they were kind of like confused, but in awe. And then there were some people who tried to make fun of me for it. Not a whole lot, but in high school, I was a smart, pretty, blonde cheerleader. And so it very obviously was not because I didn't have anyone willing to have sex with me. It's because I was making that personal choice. Because I always seemed to have some kind of guy that had a crush on me, or I was dating somebody, so I was never this like unwanted, undesirable person. Um, but I'm sure that there are people who, were thinking, being called a virgin is like derogatory. And so you always see those like high school movie and TV show tropes that are like, oh, trying to get rid of my virginity before I graduate high school, or by my 16th birthday, or, whatever it is. Um, and so that could attribute to the difference in the percentage points, because it's like a percentage of like 11-point difference, which I mean is pretty significant. Um, but whenever I see data like this and they say, oh, from across the nation, I'm like, how across the nation? Because me having taken a statistics class and me having taken assessment classes in order to do assessments for my job. Um, I like to know the nitty gritty of like, when you say this, what does that actually mean? Um, so, this risk behavior survey from 2013 to 2023 covers 39 states across the country, um, from high schools. However, only like this data is only coming from high schools in like really large areas. Like, I want to say in Texas, there were a few schools, but it was like a Dallas, Houston, San Antonio. And I made the comment on my discussion board that, like, I work in Title I, low socioeconomic, rural schools that, have 100 people in a grade, not 500 people in a grade. Um, and and so, like, is that really representative of the communities that I serve? Because I don't necessarily think it might be, because I mean, it's a totally different universe. San Antonio, Dallas, Houston, to, you know, little small communities in towns that don't have movie theaters. Some of the towns that have schools that I go into don't have a Walmart. Like, they have to drive 15, 20 minutes to get to a Walmart. They have to drive, 30 to 45 minutes for some of these places to get to a movie theater. Um, and so I don't know that that's a good representation of every teen. Um, what I also noticed was that, while 39 states worth of high schools participated, barely any middle schools participated. And this youth behavior risk survey, like, straight up says it's from middle school and high school data. I mean, it was like barely any middle schools. I think I was all fancy and said it was a negligible amount of middle schools. And it really irritated me, that they included middle schools as, like, claiming that, um, because they were really trying to say that they asked kids from 13 to 18. And so 13-year-olds are in middle school, 14-year-olds are in middle school, um, sometimes even 15-year-olds are in middle school. But, like, the data would probably look exactly the same if you would have eliminated those middle schools, honestly. Or it might have been more accurate if you would have said, we asked high school students. That gives you a better idea, and it's easier to picture instead of trying to, like, smash middle school and high school age kids together, because they're completely different worlds. So, the final thing we have to talk about is current events. In this class, there are 3 current event journal assignments. Week 2, this week, is the first time we're having to do one. The parameters for the current event journal are different than the current event journal parameters from the foundations class, because if you watch those videos, I had to do a current event journal every single week in my foundations class. But the parameters for these current event assignments, she says, had to have happened within the last, like, 2 to 3 months. And, like, when I started my foundations class in January, like, everything was hot off the presses and, like, coming out in real time as we were writing up our assignments. and now things have kind of stagnated and gone stale. So I was kind of freaking out because it was like right there, like in that like end of March kind of time frame where it was like eking into month 3, and I struggled so hard to find a news article that was within 2 months that I eventually just got to the point where I was like, okay, whatever, like if it goes into month 3, I don't care if she gives me a couple points off for that. I've got to turn something in. I've got to find something and move on with my life. So for this current event journal, I found a news article from The Hill, and this article from them that I will share in my comments for the video, or not the comments, the video description. The Hill is summarizing basically all of the recent changes that Donald Trump made regarding sex and gender. And so he signed an executive order recognizing only 2 genders based on their reproductive function. So, like, that's how he set the parameters. And he also rescinded 78 of President Biden's executive orders. One specifically was related to trans individuals being able to openly serve in the military. And of course, the ACLU, or the American Civil Liberties Union, which is in California, I think is where their headquarters are, is, of course, like having a total freak out and has pledged to take him down or whatever. And The Hill also took that moment to just like lots of other like more liberal, left-leaning organizations and companies have been doing in response to all these executive orders. They have been defining and like reminding people of the parameters of an executive disorder. Executive disorder, heavens to Betsy. Setting and reminding people of the parameters of an executive order. It might as well be a disorder at this point. He has done it about 1 trillion times. It's bound to be pathological at this point. So they took that time to remind us that executive orders do not and cannot change the law. Executive orders can only ensure that laws are faithfully executed, but cannot overrule already existing laws and statutes. So they are reminding all of these little friends that are out here worried that, Trump is gonna make gay marriage illegal again or something. I don't know. It very much so reminds me of these like sort of unnecessary worries that people had the first time Trump got elected. I had a lot of African American students, or Black students is really what they are. And they were, 7th grade kids who had never left their hometown. And they were like, oh my gosh, Miss Cordray, which is from before I got married. Where if he gets elected, he's going to send us back to Africa. And I said, okay, well, time out, because that is, first of all, like, that doesn't have anything to do with writing, which is what I taught. But I know if we don't discuss this, that we're not going to get to writing today. So take a pause pill, and let's talk about your concern. Were you born there? No? Okay. Have you ever been there? No? Okay. So what makes you think that he's gonna send you back to somewhere that you've never been in the first place? That would be like if I was worried that he was gonna send me to North Dakota when I've never been to North Dakota. I've like the I'm unrelated to that location at all, just like you are unrelated to that place. You're an American citizen. He is not displacing American citizens. And you could like see their wheels turning when they were like, "Oh, yeah, why?" Like I'm still kind of concerned about it cuz like I could tell like they got that from somewhere and they were like feeding off of the fear of someone else, but like what I said very like non-emotionally made sense to them and they didn't know what to do with it. Um, but that kind of reminds me of the same thing I've been hearing, well, especially this second election. People have been talking about um, Hispanic citizens um, and and illegal immigrants like being sent back to their countries, and the big immigration push, and and people who were born here, raised here. Like I've been hearing people like that worry again, and it just made me think, okay, not much has changed. But so I've heard people in the LGBT community kind of worry about that. The less conservative ones have been talking about like how they think that like Trump is gonna like totally null all of these laws, like the legalization of gay marriage, and like that he's gonna nullify all of their marriages and their licenses. And that's not what he's after. That's not the issue, and he has not made that the issue. Um, and so I always think it's funny. Like I can almost immediately point out when a news article is like left leaning because they give a little tidbit on what executive orders are and what they mean and what they can and can't do. Um, but so, anywho, back to this Hill article for current events. Um, so I explained that I have heard compelling arguments for people wanting to be, you know, wanting their documents and such in medical records and passports and things like that, wanting to have their gender identity listed instead of their biological sex. And I've also heard, uh, the preference for the biological sex to be on the document instead as well. And I think that's such a hard case to make. I have siblings who are in the medical field. I have a brother who will soon have finished his nurse practitioner program, and I have a sister who is an infectious disease PA. And it, like, in medical situations, it is important to know the person's biological sex. Like, if my husband fell out and an ambulance with EMTs came, they need to know that, like, he's not pregnant and that he's not nursing. And if I say he is a man, then they know that they don't have to consider anything that could be specific to females and vice versa. Um, and like, if I go to the doctor and I'm having a medical problem, they know that, I probably don't have prostate cancer because that is a male specific issue. Um, and I have seen some people say, like, oh, you could have their biological sex on their chart and their gender identity marker, but like in emergency situations, when you pull up a patient's file, like that could too easily get mixed up in the heat of the moment. And I don't know that that would be safe. I don't know that would be a good compromise. Um, as far as things like passports and stuff, like travel documents, like non-medical things, um, there are some people that have already transitioned that look more like what they identify as. And so it could be a matter of safety. Um, and so I feel like if they were to like grant that argument that, we could say, oh, the people that can pass keep the marker for safety reasons, like, because if you look like a runway model and you look like a woman but it says that you're a man, like, there are people out there who commit acts of violence when they shouldn't because of their beliefs and morals and values, and that's not appropriate. It's not okay. um, but for a safety reason, it might be beneficial. Um, and I could see how, like, if someone had a full blown beard and looked like a man, having them listed as female might be an issue too, because if men realize that that was really a woman, well, men are biologically stronger than women. Like, a group of men could really harm a woman who very much so looks like a man. Um, but how do we decide what passing means? Like, how do we put that in definable terms? That's a very opinion based term, because there are plenty of masculine looking women and feminine looking men who, who aren't identifying themselves as transgender and who aren't taking hormones and things like that. Um, it's really a super complex situation. That's why I'm glad I am not required to make those kinds of choices. But I think that people shouldn't. I ultimately think that it should go back to their biological sex, like Trump is saying. But I do worry about those who are far enough down the line that they look like the other sex, and like their safety. Um, let's see. Oh, another thing that the Hill mentioned was that, um, where did it go? Oh, about undoing the executive order about trans individuals being able to openly serve in the military. Um, I know when I was growing up, there was that whole don't ask, don't tell for gay military members. Um, and in my last video, I talked about the fact that I'm more of a libertarian. I'm a conservative libertarian, but like, not very many people are wanting to serve our country as compared to back in the day. And, like, if you want to defend our country and our values and keep us safe, like, I don't care if you're male, I don't care if you're female, I don't care what like ethnicity you are. Like, I appreciate that you are willing to defend our nation and make that sacrifice. Um, I I don't know what the trickle down effect of having transgender individuals in the military is. That's not something I've looked into. I didn't even realize that there was an executive order rescinded about this until I read the article. Um, but I know that there are plenty of military based jobs that don't have to do with combat, that don't have to do with like sharing like bathrooms and bunks and things like that. So I mean, if you want to make the argument about it being related to like safety or like the mixing of individuals and things like that, then I think there are workarounds. I think it would be like a complex and complicated issue, but I think it can be done. But I mean, if you want to serve the military puts people through rigorous like physical, mental, and emotional checks to make sure they're fit for service. And if they pass those and they're willing to defend our country, like, I am so thankful because I am not someone who can, because I have a special needs child that I have to be at home and take care of. And so I I mean, are we really in a position where we can be picky when less and less people want to enlist and serve? I don't know. Like I I I don't know. That seems like a first world problem to me. Um and what did I ultimately it it kind of reminds me of like when they didn't want women to be in the military also. Um it's kind of exclusionary for no obvious reason that I can come up with. Um so him being Donald Trump, him rescinding the executive order isn't against the law. And, it's open to interpretation. All laws are. But it does seem to fall on the more discriminatory side of the law. I, I don't know. I don't know. I I wouldn't be that picky about it, but I am well aware of the fact that I could be missing some like major groundbreaking piece. But, it shows the true humility and intelligence of a person when, as they gather more information on a subject, they are willing to change their minds and change their stance. So I am always open to receiving more information and changing my mind and changing my stance. Um, there, there are very few things that I refuse to change my mind about. But I think that is it for week 2. I did not mean to go on so many tangents. I will be back relatively soon for week 3, hopefully. Um, I thought, on a final note, I thought I was going to be able to take a summer class for one of my 6 therapy classes, but that fell through. Not enough people signed up for it, so very sad about that. But I'll have plenty to do this summer. I really did not need to be adding a class to that. I'm always trying to do too much. So, in the meantime, like, subscribe, comment, do all the things. This has been Raw Reflections. I'm Keaton Wyndham. I will see you guys later. Bye.